just a moment ago, there is a chat feature that should be available on the control panel on your screen. So if you have questions that you want to flag for Ali as she goes, feel free to drop those in there. So the webinar is this morning designed to answer really practical questions. This is the reporting for Ali's recently completed PhD work, and these slides that should be on your screen right now are just some of the slides that were part of her actual dissertation. However, we wanted to provide a readily accessible solution for you today rather than diving deep into mediation analysis with identity fusion correlated to projected time to exit with funny little symbols. So I'm not a statistics guy, but Ali is going to make that as accessible as possible because we undertook the research for really practical reasons, which was to identify points of leverage that would really help owners achieve their goals in terms of transition with greater effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability. So Ali's going to make this, it's designed for business owners this morning, and we know we have a lot of advisors on the phone also because I think it's equally useful for advisors as they work with business owners. So Ali's going to describe her theoretical framework and what the data that we collected through this PhD process told us about owners in really practical ways. She'll then describe how those insights can be used to help owners and advisors increase success at the three most challenging types of transitions that owners face: scale, sale, or succession. And so why are those types of significant transitions so challenging? Why do the vast majority of owners actually fail more often than they succeed at these critical transition points? And if those odds are stacked against them, what can be done to help owners beat those transition odds? And it's for those answers that I turn to my esteemed colleague, Ali.
Thanks, Andrew. And I want to start by thanking the owners that participated in the study. This research wouldn't have been possible without all of you. After reaching out to more than 6,000 owners over a grueling 372-day period, we had 168 completions of the instruments and 133 usable responses. So without those participants, we would not have gained the insights that we're going to share with you today. Your contribution provided critical insights about how an owner's psychology impacts their transition success. As Andrew described it, the three most challenging points of transition. Now, the prior research and literature has demonstrated that the #1 reason these significant transitions fail more often than they succeed is definitely at the point of the owner's psychology. Our research, thanks to these owners, shines new light on the opportunities for owners to beat the odds and increase their success. And this is important not just for owners and advisors, but also employees and the global economy. And the reason for that is that low to mid-market owners employ more than 50% of the US workforce and as much as 64% of the global workforce, and they generate more than $3 trillion in annual revenue. Yet 50% of owners fail to plan for their exit until they decide to exit. 70 to 80% of all businesses in the low to mid-market fail to sell on the first attempt. Of the owners that do exit, the majority are dissatisfied within 12 months of their exit. Some studies say they're profoundly dissatisfied. And while exit is by far the most challenging type of transition owners face, the reality is that scaling a business and engaging in a leadership succession present very similar psychological challenges. And this phenomenon is due to a paradox. The natural psychological inclinations of owners that make them successful can be the very things that cause them to hit the proverbial glass ceiling and fail at attempts to scale or transition their leadership to others. The overarching purpose of this research was to gain insights about the psychological dynamics owners encounter when they attempt significant transition. We know that by understanding the psychological mechanism and creating a tool that can quantify or measure the inner world of the owner, and their mind, then the hidden becomes visible, and owners are empowered to proactively engage in exploration to achieve personal mastery. Now, there's an abundance of literature. I don't know how many hundreds of studies I read and reviewed all the popular books, everything from behavioral economics to psychology to business literature. Interviewed advisors, worked with advisors, interviewed owners, listened to their stories, and leaned into our own consulting experience. And they all confirm that points of really significant transition create psychological tensions that get in the way. It's the tensions that the owners face below the surface that often go unnoticed, but are expressed through behaviors. In fact, most owners reach a point of significant transition and only then realize that the odds are stacked against them. But it's not always the case. I don't want to paint too bleak a picture. There are owners that use their natural inclinations to consistently overcome transition challenges. And the question was, what's different about this group? And owners that beat transition odds engage in ongoing personal mastery of their psychological inclinations. What do I mean by that? Owners, like all successful people, go about their lives creating opportunities and responding to demands using aspects of their personality referred to by psychologists as personality traits, or these natural inclinations I've been talking about. You might think about them as talents. Unlike a knowledge, skill, or ability that can be acquired, an inherent personality trait cannot be acquired. It cannot be manufactured. It either exists within a person or it doesn't. Simply put, a personality characteristic or trait or natural inclination or talent, whatever term you want to apply to it, is a naturally recurring thought, feeling, emotion, and behavior that can be consistently and productively applied to achieve desired objectives and goals. We all have talents. It's something you do without a lot of intentional effort. Certain things just come easily to you, and you often don't understand why others can't do these things. When you have raw talent and you add a bit of intentional effort, your ability to use these parts of your personality to achieve consistent, near-perfect performance is almost unlimited. This intentional effort, or personal mastery, transforms a talent into a strength. But even if you were to put 10 times the effort into trying to acquire a talent that you do not naturally possess, you may be able to achieve some level of skill or ability, but long before you reach mastery, you will hit a ceiling above which you cannot excel. Talents are often likened to a diamond in the rough. The gem quality diamond exists somewhere within the rock as it is discovered and removed from the earth. But the value is not fully realized until the rock is transformed through a process that requires discarding the parts that are not ideal for achieving the desired outcome, and then cutting and polishing the piece that holds the greatest value. When we talk about the value of a diamond, you might expect me to talk about the perfect diamond for an engagement ring. But fine jewelry is only one use of a high-quality diamond. Diamonds are used for everything from sound technology, industrial cutting and polishing machines, cosmetics, even medical uses. And the ideal diamond for an engagement ring would be poorly suited to industrial uses. In the same way a diamond must be transformed and fit for purpose to maximize its full potential, owners beat transition odds by increasing personal mastery of their psychological inclinations. They must first identify the personality characteristics or talents that are inherent, and then they must refine them in a fit-for-purpose approach given the type of transition they are attempting. Successful owners build, lead, and grow businesses without a conscious or self-aware appreciation of how they do what they do because it often comes so naturally to them. That doesn't mean they don't have to work hard and overcome obstacles. They most certainly do. Blood, sweat, and tears goes into building a business. What it does mean is that their natural personality traits give them an edge over others that do not possess the necessary raw material to succeed as active owner-managers. All things being equal and without any intentional personal mastery, these owners will scale their business to the degree of complexity that is directly proportional to their raw talent. Let me illustrate what I mean by that. These are growth curves. They're derived from the 2012 US Business Census. If you look at the attrition rate as annual revenue increases, you first note that 96% of all businesses fail to break the $1 million annual revenue barrier. And each successive growth curve represents a level of organizational scale and complexity that is significantly greater than the curve before it. The research has demonstrated that the drop-off in the number of businesses at each point is remarkable. And market forces, financial resources, personal networks, and available opportunities are insufficient to explain the significant drop-off at these points of transition. Authors Blackaby and Blackaby capture well what Jack Welch, Peter Drucker, and other titans of industry describe in one way or another as the key reason for success or failure. They say the greatness of an organization will be directly proportional to the greatness of its leader. It's rare for organizations to rise above their leaders. In the fifth discipline, the art and practice of the learning organization, Peter Senge describes the need to become adept at organizational learning and continuous transformation to continue to compete at higher and higher levels of complexity that comes with success. In our own consulting experience, prior to beginning the research, we did find a few owners that were able to sustain hard-fought challenges once we exited. Yet these were extremely rare cases, and the majority of owners would simply go back to business as usual, or what Andrew refers to as the owner's waterline. Now, waterline is the highest level the ship can rise to unaided. From the owner's perspective, they often describe a sense of working harder but getting nowhere fast, being tired or frustrated with their staff's inability to get results. They say what used to be easy is now really tough. And when they want to exit, not being able to find the right buyer with the right terms, despite a sea of ready, willing, and able buyers. After digging into more than 40 years of existing research and applying fundamental understandings of business, personality, and behavioral psychology, we recognize that owners use their natural inclinations or talents to satiate certain psychological drivers called motivations. And they also derive their identity from their role. This mechanism results in a couple of predictable behaviors. And the paradox is that the very personality traits that make owners successful can create challenges at the point of scale, sale, and succession. Their talents literally become weaknesses as they experience psychological threats to their identity and motivational drivers. That is why owners must engage in personal mastery of their psychological inclinations to overcome transition odds, and that requires both time and intentionality. The bridge to transition success starts with exploration and getting clarity on your unique personality traits that help to make and keep you and your business successful. Bo Burlingham, writer for Inc. and Forbes, author of several books, and it looks like he's joined us on the webinar. It puts a huge smile on my face. He's written The Great Game of Business, Small Giants, and the book that had a dramatic impact on my early dissertation research, Finish Big, How Great Entrepreneurs Exit Their Companies on Top. He hit the nail on the head when he described finishing on top as owners being happy with the exit. It's that simple. After he interviewed more than 75 successful owners, his qualitative findings aligned with other research findings of our own research. And the vast majority of owners, up to 75% according to some studies, are reported to be dissatisfied or profoundly dissatisfied within just 12 months of the close of their sale. An even more important finding was that owners that were successful went through 4 distinct phases. As Bo unpacked what he discovered from these owners, these 4 phases were very consistent. It starts with exploration, asking all the existential questions about what an owner does and does not want in transition, identifying the why behind their goals, and establishing a vision for the future. In the strategic phase, this is where they develop the tactical transition plan. They begin to view the business as a product to be sold, even if that isn't going to happen for many years. This prepares them for the execution phase. If it's an exit, as Bo's research described, through scale or succession, this is a legal process, the actual transaction that must be completed. If it's scaling up, this is the implementation of the tactics necessary to achieve the goal. And then the fourth phase, Bo refers to this phase as transition. We look at the entire process as transition and look at the fourth phase that Bo describes as adjustment. It's in this phase where the owner lets go of their former role identity and assumes their new role identity, either by achieving scale and transforming the way they engage in the world, and the way they engage with others, and the way they satiate these motivational drivers to accommodate greater complexity, or by exiting and taking on a brand new role beyond that of owner-manager. They go on to be happy and have a life of significance. But owners that fail to engage in the exploration phase, they'll attempt to work out their unresolved challenges through the strategic and execution phases. And if it remains unresolved, even if they get through strategic and execution, they'll enter the adjustment phase. And that's where owners begin to feel this sense of discontentment or profound dissatisfaction. As I read Bo's book and dug through the literature, the similarities between the three major types of transition, scale, sale, and succession, on a psychological level were astounding. Understanding the psychological mechanism was good, but insufficient to achieve change. We had to isolate the root cause and find a way to quantify it. That is where the power for sustainable change would reside. I'll never forget mustering the nerve to call Bo and see if he'd let me pick his brain. That conversation was a pivotal moment in the research that shifted my focus from describing the differences between the transitions to understanding how the personality dimensions of successful owners are used to satiate three critical motivational drivers necessary for psychological health. As with talents, we all have motivational drivers that need to be satiated. To explain this phenomenon, researchers Ryan and Deasy developed the self-determination theory of motivation, or SDT. They identified three essential motivational drivers: autonomy, relatedness, and competency, that must be met to possess a sense of well-being, experience emotional balance, have the ability to cope with the stresses of everyday life, and be productive members of society. Autonomy is the ability to exercise free will, to act independently, and to direct one's own path. Relatedness is the need to care for and be cared for by others. Competency is a sense of feeling effective and capable in the world. How, meaning the psychological mechanism each of us uses to satiate these motivational drivers, is directly related to our personality characteristics. And this is where differences begin to appear between successful owners and others. The literature pointed to 5 characteristics or talents that are common to successful owners. They have a risk-taking propensity, and this is the willingness to take risks that are deemed prudent by the owner, by the individual, that others may deem as extreme or uncomfortable levels of risk. Successful owners view risk differently than advisors, managers, and others. They will protect and avoid risk, putting at risk all that they have built. But they will take risks when they believe that they have control over the outcome, even when it doesn't make sense to their financial advisors. They take risks they believe that they can control the outcome of. They also have a tolerance for ambiguity. They have no need to have every detail planned out for every event that may or may not happen for 5, 10, 20 years or more in the future. Every time they achieve a new level of success, they enter new uncharted waters. And while many will develop very detailed strategic business plans, they do not feel the need to have every detail of their retirement planned out years in advance. And this is also in part due to this third trait, innovativeness. It's an interesting dimension because it has 2 components. Trait innovativeness, or this talent, is the ability to apply creativity to seize opportunities others may miss, to find just-in-time solutions, and connect dots in ways that lead to new opportunities. And there's another dimension we'll talk a little bit more about in just a few minutes. It's the behavioral innovativeness, and this is used to describe a problem-solving style or openness to change. And these three traits work together with the fourth trait that's commonly found among successful owners, and that is the need for achievement. This is a drive to relentlessly pursue objectives and goals to realize a desired outcome. Successful owner-managers are driven and often compete with themselves as much or maybe even more than they compete with others. They're rarely satisfied with the status quo, but the goals must be their goals. They will feel no need to achieve somebody else's goals just because they are told it's important. And this is in part because of the fifth trait, a need for control. Many successful owners have what we refer to as an internal loci of control. That is a sense that they can exert power or force on the world around them to affect the changes and achieve the results they want. This is contrasted with people who have an external loci of control and view the world as impinging on them and limiting their ability to succeed. Stuff gets done to them. That brings us to the predictable behaviors that I mentioned. And this is where things really got interesting in the research. The study data revealed a surprising and incredibly important new insight. Based on the literature, our own experience, owner interviews, Bo's book, advisor observations, what I expected to find was predictable behaviors tied to self and role identity. But there was more. The existing literature had already defined behavioral innovativeness, also called openness to change, as at its core being a problem-solving style. That was well defined in the literature. We knew it already was at play in how owners move to action. So we focused our research on this concept of entrepreneurial role identity fusion. Both ERIF and openness to change are definitely behaviors that are important at points of significant transition. But then the data surprised us. Your insights demonstrated that a need for significance was a pivotal factor in the psychological process of transition. What we discovered is that owner-managers' sense of significance or the sense of being valued and esteemed in the world is often met primarily through their role as owner. The data also identified a critical relationship between the level of significance met through the role as owner and the level of role identity fusion. This relationship is predictive of the owner's potential for engaging in a successful transition. Now, bear in mind that while all owners will exit at some point, most exits are not successful in that the owner does not go on to live a life of satisfaction and significance. Likewise, efforts to break through levels of organizational complexity fail when they exceed the owner's natural talents, unless they have first engaged in personal mastery. Think of it this way. We all have a self-identity that defines who we are and how we perceive ourselves to operate in the world. We also have many role identities: wife, mother, father, husband, daughter, son, coach, boss, friend, colleague, team member, and the list goes on. But when one of these role identities predominates, as is often the case for people in positions of power and prominence, such as successful low to mid-market owners, the self-identity and the role identity can become fused. In many ways, role identity fusion creates a level of resilience for the owner, and it's a very helpful psychological mechanism for many of the demands they face, obstacles they must overcome, and barriers they must crush to be successful. But if the self and role identities are too fused, entrepreneurial role identity fusion causes problems at points of significant transition. As a result of increased complexity and uncertainty, scaling, selling, or engaging in leadership succession inevitably creates a threat at the pre- or subconscious level. Owners experience tensions, but it's difficult to know the source. It's not like you can go to the doctor and you've got a broken leg and they can take an x-ray and it's made clear instantly. Most have little idea about the pain or tensions or discomfort or angst that they're experiencing as a threat to their needs for competency, relatedness, autonomy, identity, and significance needs. As a result, these psychological threats often lead to detrimental behaviors that prevent a successful transition. There will almost always be a business reason for it. But when you dig below, there is an additional layer of complexity. And that is that most owner-managers build businesses to work with their psychological inclinations. Their management teams foster the owner's ability to operate in certain ways. The business literally takes on the personality of the owner or owners, and in many regards, it must, in order to allow the owner to achieve success. As a result, it is not uncommon to see entire management teams struggle when it comes to significant transitions. At the core, we're talking about the need for the owner, his or her management team, and ultimately the entire organization to behave differently than they have in the past. And this type of change is inherently complex. It requires the owner to transform him or herself before he can expect others to be transformed, before the business can be transformed. And when role identity fusion and the need for significance are not addressed, they will almost certainly become detriments at the points of significant organizational transition. Let's go back to our diamond example. The gemologist doesn't simply begin hacking away at the rock. She studies it carefully and analyzes the nascent opportunity it presents. She knows that every decision she makes will affect the profitability outcome. By identifying the owner's openness to change along with their level of entrepreneurial role identity fusion, or ERIF, and the need for significance along a continua, we're able to identify levers of change that help owners, that they serve as a guide to their road to personal mastery of their psychological inclinations. As a result of the contribution made by prior researchers and the 168 owners in our study, we can confidently measure these critical behaviors. We're able to identify the cuts in the diamond that must be made and the polishing technique that can be applied to get maximum profitability, to get the best outcomes. Owners that are in the lower left-hand quadrant that are hesitant need focused effort at gaining clarity, defining their objectives, moving to action with greater caution, but ensuring they have a well-developed vision for the future. Owners in the upper right-hand quadrant that are conflicted are open to change. They're willing to try new things, but they often mistake activity for productivity and can get caught up in the process of transition. As a result, they end up in situations they may not want to be in. And these owners can use the exploratory phase to increase their confidence about the future, resolve internal tensions, and this is where advisors can be extremely helpful by helping owners see around the corner and pause for reflection to resolve the conflictedness before they move to action. This is why the exploratory phase is so vital. Owners on the webinar that are contemplating scaling, selling, or engaging in a leadership succession may be saying, that's all fine and good, but how? What specific steps can I take today? We developed a framework called the M3 to answer the inevitable how and what questions. One of the major challenges for successful owners at points of significant transition is that expert advice often focuses on strategic and execution phase. It makes sense when you consider that these are the areas where owners feel most comfortable and in control, and where most of the advice is aimed. The strategic and execution phases generally focus on the business and the money dimensions. But as Bo Burlingham noted, and our research confirmed, the exploratory phase is the most critical phase for success. The exploratory phase first focuses on the self, in light of the desired business transition and associated financial implications. These 3 dimensions and 22 variables form the basis for effective exploration. Such a process is never easy, but the work of the exploratory phase is what sets owners that successfully transition apart from those who do not. Think of the M3 framework as a map for the exploratory phase. The map is a useful mechanism that empowers owners to engage in personal mastery to beat transition odds. Owners that invest the time to do the exploratory work, no matter how uncomfortable it may be, define what they do and do not want in a transition. They're prepared to know what compromises they will and will not make. They get a peek around the corner at the future that enables them to stay in control. And perhaps more importantly, when they get to the adjustment phase, they're able to sustain and benefit psychologically from the exploratory work. Now, the first step is always the hardest. To make it easier, we're making the finalized instrument available at no charge to the owners that participate in the study. That was a promise we made to you when you agreed to participate. And if you have not already done so, we encourage you to take the finalized instrument. You'll get an automatic score that gives you a sense of your personal readiness. Owners that participate in the study also have the opportunity to receive a complimentary 15-minute debrief of their results to better understand the implications of your readiness in the context of the specific type of transition you're contemplating. We believe so strongly in the value of the exploratory phase for helping owners engage in personal mastery to beat transition odds that we created a white paper for the M3 framework to serve as a guide for owners and their advisors as they begin to think about the exploratory and strategic phases differently. You can find the M3 framework white paper on our website. It's a complimentary resource that provides greater insights about each of the 3 dimensions and the 22 associated variables. And as we move to the Q&A portion, I'd like to thank you again for your investment of time and insights that made this research possible.
Thanks, Ali. I'm going to, if you do have questions or comments or thoughts, now is a great opportunity to drop those in the chat box. I will have a question for you, Ali. How do the things that you described, how does that look different in a multi-owner and or family environment? What are some of the particular dynamics involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we go back, hoping the tech works, if we go back to the M3 framework, when we work with multiple owners, particularly families, instead of it being my business, my money, that's really our business and our money. It's always in the context of the self, but then there's also the broader system. When there are multiple owners, we often find an owner that has stronger kind of entrepreneurial identity. So those 5 talents are often much more prominent. We find other owners that have varying levels of these traits. The important thing there is to identify where each individual is, have them go through their own individual exploration process of the self, and then align their view of the self, the business, and the money with the rest of the organizations, the rest of the owners. This helps us identify discrepancies early before the complexity arises during a transition or a transaction.
So a really good example of that for us at the moment is that we're working with a company. It's about $100 million construction company. And there's 2 brothers who took over from Dad. Dad suddenly held 10% at the succession table, so to speak. But there was also a younger sister who was a teenager at the time. The boys have grown the business significantly. And now they're trying to figure out, what does succession transition look like for the 3rd generation who's starting to come through? They don't want it to be as the experience that they had as young men taking over from their father. But they're also struggling with mom and dad's remaining expectations about how that daughter is inherited or not, and how her children are inherited or not into the business. And a really great example of this role identity fusion was one of the brothers recognized, we were with him the other day, and he recognized that, look, I realized if I kept going the way I was going to be my dad. And one of the things he did to help reduce his, effectively, he wouldn't have used these terms, but his fusion with the business in terms of his identity was he started a softball league, a traveling softball league that's proven to be really successful. And he himself has recognized that has contributed significantly to finding some of those psychological needs that Ali described in terms of competency and autonomy and relatedness are being met outside of the business. And so when we have now that we're having a transition conversation for him, that's a very different conversation for him than it is, and it would have been for his dad, because he's recognized himself of the need to change some of those psychological dimensions that Ali described. Ali, do you want to comment any further on that?
No, I think that was a great summary. A great summary. I'm going to unmute Bo. I see that you're on here, Bo, so I'm going to unmute you really quick. Let's see if you have audio. Hi, Bo.
Hi, Ali. How are you? Can you hear me?
Oh, Bo may not have audio.
Hold on.
Bo may not have audio. Okay.
Hello?
Well, we'll leave that. I was going to ask Bo to comment on some of his experience. He talks about some owners in his book that the difference between those that exit successfully and those that didn't. And there were a couple stories. One in particular of a gentleman who exited his business. He did it all by himself. Believed he got a pretty good deal, but then had nothing left, so he continued to rearrange the pencils on his desk in his basement for months until he founded a new business and found something beyond his role as owner. What we find with a lot of younger business owners as they exit is they go on to create something new. One big takeaway from this is once an entrepreneur, once a successful owner, those talents and characteristics and traits, they don't go away when you exit. So finding new ways to make meaning of them gets really, really important. Let me see, we've got another question coming in. Okay, so yeah, all the resources are available on our website, and I apologize for scrolling by too fast. I'll put that information up for you again. And you should be able to see that now. And we'll go ahead. We want to be conscious of your time. We've got a few more questions that are just popping in. There will be a follow-up email, and you can shoot any additional questions to me at ali@ockiwi.com, and I'll be happy to respond to them for you. The follow-up email will also contain a link to the recording, and for the owners, you will have a link to the assessment as well. So I want to thank everyone again for participating and for making this research possible. Have a great day.